I'm Doug Thompson. Welcome to this edition of Legislative Updates with John Barker of the Kansas House of Representatives for the 70th District. Most of us get our information concerning the actions of the Kansas legislature either from some form of media or after the fact, as the legislation either became law or died during the process. Representative John Barker has graciously agreed to take time from his schedule to update pending legislation as the bills are moving through committee to consideration by the House of Representatives. Right after this short break, let's talk with Representative John Barker concerning this week in the Kansas legislature. Welcome to Legislative Updates. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with my guest, John Barker. And John's a regular here, and we're getting to have another regular here, and that's Dan Hawkins. This is going to be the fourth show you've done with us, Dan.
Fourth time.
And it's awesome to have you here. Have a lot of information we need to go through, and I know you're from the 100th District out of Wichita, and John, you're from the 70th District. Out of this area. We're in the Abilene-Chapman area and surrounding area. So where do you want to begin? Because I understand the legislative session has maybe ended.
Yes, it has, Doug. It's been an interesting, we didn't go over this year a number of days. We hit our 90th day. Sine Die was in conjunction with the last day of session. Normally we have Sine Die later, and I think we talked about that in an earlier show. But this year we, just for example, give you this, 799 bills were introduced in the House.
Well, that's a lot of bills.
That's a lot of bills. Of that, 243 House bills passed and were sent to the Senate. Of that, 131 House bills passed the Senate, and 105 bills have been signed by the governor. 3 bills have been vetoed by the governor, and 1 bill became law without the governor's signature. In comparison to the Senate introduced 462 bills. The Senate passed 157 bills, passed and sent to the House. The House worked 103 Senate bills that passed the House. 86 Senate bills have been signed by the governor. 1 Senate bill has been vetoed by the governor, and no bills have become law without the governor's signature. So that kept us busy.
That sounds like that would keep you busy. When you mentioned that there's 1 bill that the governor didn't sign that became law,
right?
Is that a procedure that if it sits on the desk for a certain period of time, is
10
it 10 days?
10 days.
And then it automatically becomes law without his signature?
He gets it for 10 days after it's been enrolled by and signature by both the House, the Speaker of the House, and the President of the Senate. It's then presented to the governor. From that time and for 10 days, he has it. If he's not taken any action on it, vetoed it or signed it, then it becomes law without his signature. Governor Brownback did that on a number of bills. He did it on the Southeast Kansas casino. He was not for gaming, but there was a lot of interest in Southeast Kansas to have that casino, so he let it become law without his signature. But you know, some of the highlights of the session was one of Dan's bills, which was telemedicine, which you've talked about before on the show.
Yeah, and you know, we finally got that through, John.
Yes, we did.
House Bill 2028, the telemedicine bill, is going to really be, and in fact, I think it will prove to be the major health legislation in the last several years. So it's very important. And Doug, what that bill does really is anything that is currently covered by insurance in an office or in a facility setting that can be done through telemedicine means can now be paid for. We're not mandating how much the insurance companies pay for that. We're just saying that if it's already a covered item, now it can be covered through telemedicine. In addition, we added through conference, we had conference committee on that, and actually that bill, we had, I think it was 4 different conferences over 4 days on that bill. It wasn't an easy one to get through. There was a lot of negotiating to get done on that. We did add speech and language pathologist and audiologist for Medicaid only. So that was kind of one of those things that the Senate wanted. Actually, the Senate wanted to throw every single provider in there that is out there, and which would have really raised the cost of insurance. I kind of resisted that. Through negotiation, we finally got them to slow back down and really got it back down to where we thought it was manageable. So it really applies to physicians, physician assistants, PAs, ARMPs, which are nurse practitioners, mental health care professionals, and then the speech and language pathologists and audiologists.
But it did fail the House the first time, the conference committee.
Actually, it failed the House the first time, and what happened was Kansans for Life had placed an abortion piece in that bill.
I placed it in the committee.
Actually, you did. He was the one that actually wrote the piece for it. It was a compromise. There was a lot of discussion about that. John actually wrote the compromise language. We put it in. It went to conference, and it got extracted out in conference. Came back to the House for ratifying or adopting the conference committee report, and the House rejected it. So it went back to conference, put it back in, brought it back to the House, and we finally got it passed.
And in fact, when Dan and I are good friends, we do a lot of things together. He went up and did the adoption of the conference committee, and I followed him with a motion to not adopt the conference committee, and I explained why. And some people came up and said, "You guys are disagreeing or fighting over." We really don't. It was something. And in fact, you voted with me.
I did.
You did vote with me, and so we were able to put that non-severability clause back as far as the abortions cannot be done by telemedicine.
All right.
And that was important to us.
We're going to cut away. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back. You're watching Legislative Updates. Welcome back to Legislative Updates. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with my guests, John Barker and Dan Hawkins, and we were talking about the legislature. John, one of the things that we had talked about before quite a bit of time was the dog tracks, because I know that was something you were sponsoring, and it was going to create about
4,500 jobs throughout the state, 400 for this area, central Kansas.
Wow, and that's a lot. What became of the bill?
Okay, well, we introduced it in both the House and the Senate. It came to my committee in the House, and we passed it out of the Federal and State Affairs and got it below the line, what we call below the line. Could not get the Speaker to bring it above the line. The Senate, we had it introduced to the Senate, we got it through the Senate, Fed and State, and got it below the line, and fortunately the Senate President and the Majority Leader on that side agreed to bring it above the line and debate it. I think they debated it for a couple of hours.
Yes.
And in fact, the Senate President, Susan Weigel, got up and spoke for it. I thought we had an agreement. It was a bipartisan bill. Of course, you've met Representative Lusker, who was here on the show, and we talked about dogs and horse racing because we worked together on it. And we thought we had it enough. We had over our 21 votes, which is needed in the Senate. And at the last minute, the Democrats, Laura Kelly and several of the other Democrats, just got off the bill, voted no.
Why? I mean, if you know.
I don't know. I know Representative Lusker was very upset because he thought we all had them lined up. They told us that they were going to support it. They'd supported it in the past, and it came down to the final vote, and they voted no.
Now that's dead, of course, for this
year.
But next year it can be brought back up again?
It can be brought back up. It's the first time we've had a vote on it in probably 6 or 7 years, when Senate Bill 66 passed. I'm hopeful that the folks that want it passed will continue to support it, and nothing dies in Topeka. We just bring it back next year.
Right.
So that's where we're at on that.
Could I add something on that?
Sure.
Doug, go back to 2014. John and I were on opposite sides of that issue.
We were.
We fought it out on the floor, and John beat me on that one. I've always held that against him,
And rightfully so.
Yeah. But
oh, you're going to bring up this year?
No, I'm not. But the fact of the matter is they came up with a good compromise on that bill.
They did.
The compromise to make it to where the state was held harmless on that, and so it was really a good bill. It should have went through. I have heard that in Sedgwick County, the county commission is talking about putting that, allowing the dog track down there to be able to have slots. They're talking about putting that on the ballot. Yeah. And if they could get that on the ballot and that could pass there, that might give the legislature a little push to do something next year. So there's some stuff behind the scenes happening there.
Well, I don't know if you were on the show, Dan, when John talked about it before, about You know, here in Dickinson County, I mean, there's a Greyhound Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
There's a lot of dog training facilities, and yet they don't participate in it from the gambling standpoint and the revenue and the other jobs that go with it. But yet you go right across the line into Oklahoma, and
Got all
there it
kinds
is.
of them.
Yeah.
You know, John's educated me real well on this issue over the last 3 years. So
Well, obviously he has me
I'm
too,
well.
'cause I knew those things that he was. That's where I got it, was from him.
Yep.
So, are you satisfied with what's happened with the legislature this session?
Oh,
or is there-
we did some very good things. I mean, we passed the Kansas Safe and Secure Schools Act, which put $5 million grant program for school districts to utilize to enhance school infrastructure and safety and security for security purposes. That was not part of our education, but that was an additional $5 million. Then we had the Adoption Protection Act, and it had which would allow faith-based adoption agencies to continue to operate in Kansas. The problem that I had with it initially was that it had a paragraph D about state funding, and again, mixing state funding with religion, we get into the court system. And finally, it failed. It went back to conference committee. At least the faith-based organizations agreed to compromise somewhat. And they sent me the language. It went to the Judiciary Conference Committee. The chairman sent me an email with some proposed language, and I told him that I thought that would work. And they ended up putting that in the conference committee, and it passed by 63 votes
63.
late at night.
Yeah,
And-
matter of fact, about 11:30 at
Yeah,
night.
right.
Yeah.
So, but that's going on. We had of course, the bill that I carried on the floor, 2145. We had the protection for victims of domestic violence. If you've been convicted, if you have a concealed carry, you can't carry a gun, either under the Second Amendment carry or having a concealed carry permit. If you've been convicted of domestic violence or violation of protection from abuse, you can't carry a gun.
You have to surrender your permit too?
You do. And so that was something that we needed. Dan worked on industrial hemp.
Yeah, industrial hemp finally actually passed. Along with, there was another bill, 282, which was the, what's that called?
CBD?
No, the Controlled Substances
Right.
Act. Sometimes my brain doesn't work, but the Controlled Substances Act was in Senate Bill 282. That passed. But what the industrial hemp bill does is it allows the universities to study the possibility of growing hemp here in Kansas and then being able to export it. It's really a crop. It's not marijuana. It's hemp. Has no hallucinogenic effect whatever, but it's a good cash crop.
And it doesn't need a lot of moisture to grow.
Well,
And
it
for
would,
Kansas, it's kind of perfect place.
would be right now.
And it
wouldn't
could be a new
Yeah.
cash crop.
Yep. Okay, we're going to cut away. We're going to take a break. You're watching Legislative Updates. Welcome back to Legislative Updates. I'm Doug Thompson with my special guest John Barker and Dan Hawkins, and they are giving us an update in regards to the legislature. The session has finished. And Dan, before we cut away to break, we were talking about, what did you call it, the hemp
The hemp bill.
bill.
So
I'd ask you on break, I said, so what is this stuff? If it's not marijuana, what is it? And you went on to explain.
yeah, hemp can be used for a lot of different things. Of course, rope is one thing that they've always thought about using it for, but literally they even put it in plastics, in bumpers. They put it in food items. There's just a ton. Even biofuels they can use stalks and stuff for that. So lots and lots of different uses. But one of the biggest things, and there's a little bit of a misconception out there, hemp, the seeds, can be used to make CBD oil. CBD is the therapeutic ingredient in hemp that some people use for various maladies, whether it's some pain relief or getting off of opioids or some psychological mental health type. There's lots of different uses, but pain relief is a big one. A lot of people now think that CBD oil is legal, and it's not legal until the publication of the register. The governor has signed Senate Bill 282. Actually, I don't think he has signed it yet. It'll be next week he'll sign it. Once that's signed, and then once the register is published, then it's legal. But right now it's not legal yet. So that's something we're looking forward to.
Okay, and the bill itself is for the universities to be able to study
it.
see
Yeah.
the uses for it.
Yeah.
And you know that it's conducive for Kansas because of the climate, and it would be a
It
good
doesn't
crop
require a
year.
lot
Absolutely.
of moisture.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Right.
Kansas is actually one of the better places to grow it.
Right.
And industry is waiting to see what we do. We have to go through this process of the university studying it, and then we'll have to come back with an affirmative action bill to make it legal to just grow.
Okay.
So that's still to come.
All right. John, what else you got?
Well, I got just a couple of budget highlights I think we need to just talk about, or just, I'll go through them pretty quick. We added the $15 million to the partial restoration of the 4% cut to the Board of Regents. So we cut them 4% a couple of years ago. We're putting some of that back. We fully funded, which is a good thing, the $194 million CAPERS payment that had been deferred, ensuring that full payment is made in 19 and 20. So those CAPERS recipients out there, CAPERS has never been in jeopardy, and we will never allow it to be in jeopardy. The unfunded actuarial is there, but with the bond issue that we handled a couple of years ago and the fully funding every year of our contributions and the $194 million on the payments, it makes it, it's in great shape. We added $3.25 million to the critical needs in the water waste plan fund. We reduced state highway fund transfers to the Department of Education by $57 million, leaving more state funding for KDOT. And we provided a salary adjustment to state employees that they did not receive, and it's a 5%. The judicial branch, the non-judicial employees got 5%. We only gave the judges 2%. And the judges didn't complain too much about that. They understand that the non-judicial employees are the ones that actually need the money. We also did pass a bill that came out of Sedgwick County, which was the swatting. You know something about that, Dan?
Actually, the swatting bill got a lot of press here back early in the year, but it's where somebody calls and reports something happening, and it's not. It's really a ruse. The police came out and they actually shot the guy.
One in Wichita,
killed him.
wasn't
Yeah.
Right.
And so this put some teeth into that bill.
It allows them to go after prosecution, even though the guy was in California who made the call. They could prosecute in the state of Kansas. We also did the compensation for the wrongfully convicted. If someone comes out through DNA or whatever that they were wrongfully convicted, they could apply to the state and get $80,000 if they've been in 10 years or more.
And if they're less than 10?
It breaks it down to the year. That was the max. But everything else, education funding was up. We did what we think the Supreme Court will accept. I would like to mention that for the folks out there, you have received my survey that I sent out about a week and a half ago. In the last 3 days, I've received 100 responses.
Wow.
I want to thank you and continue to send those in, because that gives me some insight in your responses of where the district is at. It's always helpful for me. If you would, you can choose to put your return address on or not, but it does give me some indication of where the district's at, and I want to thank you for those who have mailed it back in, and if you don't want to mail it back in, you can bring it by my house. I don't care, but I really enjoy reading them. Some of the comments were very interesting. And with that, Doug.
One thing I might bring up, the last day was a strange day, and it was really kind of a strange end to the session. Generally, that last bill that we do is a big bill, and in this case, it was the tax bill, and it was the tax bill that would have gave back the federal windfall. With the federal change in the tax structure at the federal level, there's going to be a windfall of about $150 million coming to the state. We had a tax bill that would have give that money back to the taxpayers of Kansas, and
Couldn't
Doug,
get the votes.
It failed. It was we got locked up at a 59 vote. Couldn't get any more votes, and so it failed.
And it also had the Dickinson County tax
It
to
did.
renew the road tax
Oh.
to allow the vote. It was in there along with Jackson County. Several tax bills were in there together, And it did get a 59-59 vote.
One bill that did pass, and it was the very last bill. It was just a quick. It was actually so we could end on something good because we'd lost that tax vote.
Right.
Now, when you go buy a new car and you get a rebate, you're not going to get a sales tax on that rebate.
Well, that's good.
So that was a little bit of a gimme.
When was the last time I got to buy a new car?
Yeah, I bought one a couple of years ago, John.
Yeah,
Well, you know, the contact information for John Barker will be on the screen, so if you want to contact him, you can, and the same for Dan Hawkins. Both of them will be up on the screen. We're going to cut away, take a break. You're watching Legislative Updates. Welcome to Legislative Updates, and this will be your final session for this show anyway. I'm Doug Thompson, of course, with John Barker and Dan Hawkins. We've been talking about the things that have gone on in the legislature this entire session. What would cause you to, what would happen, what would you anticipate could happen that would cause the legislature to come back into session this year yet?
Well, the governor would have to call us, and I think that if the Supreme Court finds that there's not enough money, they want more money, and they close schools, we would have to come back, and the governor would call a special session. And Dan, I think you probably.
Yeah, I would say also if the courts find that the dismemberment abortion is not constitutional, if there's not if the Constitution doesn't protect that, that could certainly be a reason for us to come back to fix that. We anticipated that coming before we finished, but it hadn't come yet.
I mean, they've had it under advisement, I think, since October. Everybody thought this decision would come out in November or December. We've waited all session. It'll probably come out next Friday.
Okay, all right. We'll keep you posted as it goes, and thank you guys so much for being willing to come out and share the information. You've been watching Legislative Updates. Thanks for watching. Hope you have enjoyed this segment of Legislative Updates with John Barker. I'm Doug Thompson with special guest John Barker. Tune in next time for another Legislative Update. Thanks for watching.